Okay guys, so I wanted to let you know what I see on the new Deepin 20. And I think that many ideas of this release are very good ideas. But I also think that some others are quite experimental, and I just wanted to let you know what kind of things I see, in case that's useful, you know. And most likely the most important thing I think is this one, which is very small but I think it's quite important, which is the sound icon. I think that it should be a plugin because it is so comfortable having that always that at view and being able to quickly change volume. When that icon is not a plugin, you always have to have this list of icons, of status icons, and scroll. So that makes, the dock quite convoluted, as you can see. And especially in fashion mode, what happens is that the upper icons are too close with the others, so it's convoluted and it's not that easy to distinguish ones from the other. But on the other hand, if I change to efficient mode, what happens is that on my 24 inches screen, these icons are extremely small, there's a huge difference of sizing between this and this, and there's no option to change that. And you can say, hey, perhaps you can change the screen sizing. Well, I'm sorry to tell you that that's not possible because there's some kind of problem, and I only have 1.0 and 1.25 when before that I had many more options, so we can see that there's a big difference on sizing between visual elements here, and this is extremely small, and this it's not so pleasing to use, because if I unscroll this, so short to be able to have the volume icon, which I constantly use for changing volume, because it's much more easy to do that with this. Basically everything is a bit convoluted, but what else? So perhaps another thing we can see is that having these icons centered in function of the screen, centered according to the screen, makes sense when the dock is in the lower or upper part of the screen. It's more aesthetic that way. But when we have that on the left side or the right side, we can see that the centering really is not very aesthetic, because there's much more space in this side compared with this side, it's not visually coherent, it doesn't make sense visually having so much space here compared with this, I think. And that's one thing. And another thing that I have found is that if I open a new window, for example in an application, I have emojis here, and I open a new window there, and I get, I don't know, this. Theoretically, by clicking on this icon I should be able to change among screens, but you can see that the dock is not really responding to most of the clicks, you know. So this is a bug, and if I only have one screen, by one click it should be minimizing, but it doesn't work either, you know. Sometimes it does, but rarely. So that's something to take into account. Another thing is that I personally found that having the right panel there was a very useful thing, which many people didn't like, but I think it was the way to make a control panel because it allowed a quick access to many common things that you should be wanted to be changing frequently. One of which was the display brightness. Okay, having this at hand is very useful because it allows you during the day adjusting the brightness of your screen according to the environment. But when it is too far away, it doesn't really make much sense, you know. When it was in the right panel, it was quite handy because the right panel was able to memorize the last placement you were. So if you wanted to keep changing the setting many times during the day, the panel was still where you left it, you know. I would say that, for example, this brightness section should be above resolution, so you don't have to make so many clicks for reaching here, you know. And this is especially important in desktops in comparison with laptops, because in laptops you are able to adjust brightness using the keyboard, but on desktops what happens is that the average desktop keyboard doesn't understand setting brightness, so I don't have any key here for setting the brightness of the screen. So the only way I can change the brightness of the screen is either by using the panel or either by changing the monitor screen, which is not very, let's say, user-friendly, that second option. Okay, so having the setting accessible is important, I think, and having the icon of sound is important. Always visible, it should be always visible. It's very important. That's a very stupid thing, but a very important thing. And as I said, the display doesn't allow to scale the screen more than this, you know. And this creates another series of problems, which is if you want to have a decent sizing of screen elements, you have to fall back to going to personalization and choosing a big font, which makes easier in many applications. For example, in QBitTorrent, if I go to search and I search whatever the matrix, you can see that because of the sizing of the text is so big, the window after searching no longer fits the screen, you know. And this doesn't happen when using a smaller font, only happens because of the huge font I'm using now. But if I didn't have that huge font, it would be unpleasant for me to read the screen, you know, because my screen is not a huge screen, it's a 24 inches screen, which I think is a quite standard size, you know. And this is not the only application that we can see visual inconsistencies on sizing. For example, in Chrome, the search bar has very small fonts compared with, I don't know, any other place, Wikipedia, I don't know. Oops. If I go to Wikipedia, you will see that the sizing of the tab text, the sizing of this, and the sizing of the web page are quite different, you know. And I cannot fix this because this depends on the other thing. So that's buggy. But even more buggy is that if I change this font, the complete control panel will hang forever, and the only way to exit it is by rebooting the computer. You know, if I change this, everything will hang, and I had to reset the whole computer. But that's not the only thing that makes the computer to hang. I can, by changing the screensaver, that will also make the computer hang. And you can also see that the help, for example, if I go to the terminal and I go to help, I don't know, the screen, system monitor perhaps. But basically the help application is not working. Perhaps this is more specific of my Linux distribution, you know, but just in case, I would like to tell you that's the case. And there's some other problem, which is you can no longer configure hot corners, but the hot corners that you had previously, you still keep them. For example, I have a hot corner in the lower right side of the screen, but I have no way to disable that or to enable that. You know, I keep that corner, and because the panel is no longer, the control panel is no longer a left side scrolling panel, I have to keep this icon here, you know, because visually it doesn't make much sense thinking that scrolling there an application launches, perhaps. Well, that's it. So, bottom line is that these ideas, some of them are good ideas, but the thing is that because you had made so many changes all at once, you haven't really had the time to test if those ideas were the best implemented, you know. So I would say that it's very important that when you make a change, you make a change in isolation and publish that change before trying to publish a wide list of changes, you know. I think that it's more, you will be able to deliver a better desktop experience if you make those changes the smallest as possible and the more frequent as possible, and you see what feedback that creates and change anything that works bad before trying to make more changes. Because what happens when you try to change everything at once is that the chaos and the entropy that causes is just too big to manage, you know. This is something that I think most Linux distributions don't understand. They think that by making less frequent changes, you are less able you are less likely to piss off people. But it's just the opposite. You should be able to make changes frequently and see if that sticks or not sticks. So you always have a stable code base with some experimental code base over it, but not all experimental, because for the time being, before any upgrade, everything looks so stable and so predictable. But what happens when that upgrade comes? When you upgrade everything, that's completely gone, you know. And that's what really happens with Debian and Ubuntu, for example, that after 2 years you upgrade everything and everything is just a mess for a while, because, you know, all comes together, all the problems come together. So it's more intelligent making those changes controlled and, you know, trying and testing one by one. That's the point, you know, and testing them and seeing if they make sense. Not only what you have in your mind, is just seeing if it makes the process, the visual and the usage makes sense. You know, if it makes sense to keep this volume icon away, or even if it makes sense to have all these icons here, you know, show desktop. Why I want to show the desktop? Why I want icons on the desktop? Just because the client wants that? But does it make sense to the client having icons on the desktop? I really need to know all the time, having a view if I have files on the trust that makes that sense, you know. The thing is that, you know, I think that one should try to see in practice if something is functional. It's not what the client says, it's not what we plan, it's not what we study, it's just about testing the real thing as often as possible, you know. So this is my report to you, and that's it, you know. And I hope you find something of interest out of it, and I hope you are good and keep healthy. Okay.